The old grandfather clock in the corner of the Riverside Concert Hall lobby struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the empty space. Elena Vasquez adjusted her cleaning cart and sighed, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension that had built up over her shift. At 35, her body reminded her more often that cleaning wasn't getting any easier. Still, she was grateful for the steady night work when so many others struggled to find jobs. The concert hall during these quiet hours held a special kind of magic. Elena loved how the space transformed after the wealthy patrons and musicians had gone home. During the day, she wouldn't have dared to set foot in such a place, not with her worn clothes and calloused hands. But at night, the hall belonged to her. "Just you and me tonight," she whispered to the grand chandelier hanging above. Her voice carried across the marble floor as she pushed her cart toward the main auditorium. The massive double doors opened with a gentle creak, revealing rows upon rows of empty velvet seats, all facing the stage where the city's symphony orchestra performed for sold-out crowds. Elena flicked on just enough lights to work by. Too much brightness would ruin the special feeling of these midnight hours. She started with the back rows, dusting each seat and picking up discarded programs from the evening's performance. As she worked, she hummed a melody she'd heard during last night's rehearsal, something that had stuck in her head despite only hearing it once. The tune flowed naturally as she moved down the rows, her voice growing more confident in the perfect acoustics of the empty hall. Elena wasn't one to sing in front of others, but alone like this, she could pretend she was performing on that distant stage. What she didn't know was that someone was listening. In the shadowed wings of the stage, Alexander Wells had paused, his attention caught by the surprising musicality of her simple humming. The symphony director had returned late to retrieve his forgotten notebook, not expecting to find anyone else in the building except perhaps the night guard. Elena continued working her way forward, oblivious to her audience of one. Her humming evolved into soft singing, mixing the classical piece with a folk song her grandmother had taught her as a child. The blend was unusual but strangely beautiful. When she finally reached the front row and turned toward the stage to clean that section, Elena nearly dropped her duster. There, sitting at the grand piano, was a man she recognized immediately from the staff bulletin board, the famous director whose intense gaze had intimidated her even in photographs. "I'm sorry," she blurted, clutching her cleaning supplies to her chest. "I didn't know anyone was here. I'll come back later." Alexander shook his head, his expression curious rather than annoyed. "Please don't leave on my account. I was just listening." Elena felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "You heard me singing? I'm so sorry. Why apologize for something beautiful?" He gestured toward the melody he'd been idly playing on the piano, the same one she'd been humming. "You have a remarkable ear. That piece only premiered last week." She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "I hear the orchestra practicing sometimes while I clean. Things just stick in my head." "Perfect pitch," Alexander murmured, more to himself than to her. "And that interesting variation you added." He played a few notes, attempting to recreate her improvised blend. "My grandmother's song," Elena explained hesitantly. "It just seemed to fit." Alexander smiled, not the practiced, polite smile he gave to donors and press, but something genuine that transformed his serious face. "It does fit, surprisingly well." An awkward silence fell between them, the wealthy, educated director and the night cleaner who shouldn't even be speaking to him. Their worlds couldn't be further apart. "I should get back to work," Elena said, finally gesturing to her cart. "Of course." Alexander nodded, but instead of leaving, he played a different melody. "Do you recognize this one?" Elena tilted her head, listening. "Mozart?" she guessed, surprising herself with her own confidence. His eyebrows rose. "Yes, Piano Sonata number 16 in C major. Most people would just say classical music and leave it at that." She shrugged, embarrassed again. "There's a book in the symphony library, Introduction to the Great Composers. Sometimes I borrow it during my break." Alexander studied her with new interest. "Do you play?" "No," she answered too quickly, then amended. "Well, not really. Not like you or the orchestra musicians. But you've tried." He pressed gently. Elena looked at her hands, rough from years of cleaning. "Sometimes, when no one's around, I sit at the piano, just pressing keys, trying to find the notes I hear in my head." She couldn't believe she was admitting this to him, waiting for his laughter or disapproval. Instead, He stood and gestured to the piano bench. "Show me." "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Please me," he said, and something in his voice made it impossible to refuse. Heart pounding. Elena carefully set down her cleaning supplies and approached the gleaming grand piano, an instrument worth more than she'd earned in several years. She sat gingerly on the edge of the bench, positioning her fingers above the keys like she'd seen the musicians do. She played a simple melody, something she'd figured out herself, hesitant at first but growing more confident with each note. It wasn't technically impressive, but there was an intuitive musicality to her playing that couldn't be taught. When she finished, Elena stared at her hands, too nervous to look up. "You've never had lessons?" Alexander asked quietly. She shook her head. "Can't afford them. And anyway, it's too late for me." "Too late?" He sounded genuinely puzzled. Mozart was composing by age 5, yes, but Debussy didn't seriously study music until his teenage years. And there are countless others who found music later in life. Elena finally looked up at him, surprised by his encouragement. "You have something rare," he continued. "Natural talent can't be taught. Technique can." A loud bang from the lobby made them both jump, probably the night guard making his rounds. The spell of their unusual encounter broke and reality rushed back in. "I really should finish my work," Elena said, standing quickly. Alexander checked his watch and nodded. "And I should go. My wife will wonder what's keeping me." He gathered his notebook, his original reason for returning to the hall. As he turned to leave, he paused. "You know, Mozart is actually quite accessible for beginners despite what people think. That piece I played, the Sonata in C, it's often one of the first classical pieces piano students learn." "I'll remember that," Elena said politely. Already returning to her cleaning cart, Alexander seemed reluctant to end their conversation. With a sudden lightness that contrasted with his usual serious demeanor, he chuckled and said, "Play Mozart for me someday, and I'll marry you on the spot." The joke, so out of character for the formal director, hung in the air between them. Elena laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to such an absurd statement from a man so far removed from her world. "Good night," she finally said, turning back to her work. "Good night, Ms.
Vasquez."
Elena Vasquez. "Good night, Ms. Vasquez. I'm Alexander Wells." "I know," she replied, then added, "Everyone knows the famous director." He nodded, seeming both pleased and slightly embarrassed by this fact. With a final glance at the piano, he disappeared through the stage door. Elena stood motionless for several minutes after he left, replaying their strange encounter in her mind. Then, shaking herself back to reality, she continued her cleaning routine. But something had changed. What Alexander didn't know, what no one knew, was that Elena had indeed been teaching herself piano during her late-night shifts. For months she had been staying after her cleaning was done, playing softly on the grand piano, using music theory books borrowed from the symphony library. That night, after finishing her work and ensuring she was truly alone, Elena returned to the piano. Instead of her usual practice pieces, she opened a book of Mozart's compositions that she'd been too intimidated to try before. The Piano Sonata No. 16 in C major looked dauntingly complex on the page. But as she carefully picked out the first few notes, something clicked into place. The pattern made sense to her fingers in a way she couldn't explain. "Play Mozart and I'll marry you," she whispered to herself, smiling at the ridiculous memory. The famous director probably wouldn't even remember their conversation tomorrow, but Elena would remember. And somehow she would learn to play this sonata, not for Alexander Wells or his absurd joke, but for herself. For the little girl who had pressed her nose against music store windows, dreaming of a life she couldn't have. As the notes of Mozart filled the empty concert hall, Elena felt something she rarely experienced: possibility. Elena's fingers hovered over the piano keys, trembling slightly from exhaustion. The clock on the wall showed 3:17 a.m. She'd been practicing for nearly 2 hours after finishing her cleaning shift, and her body begged for rest. But the Mozart sonata called to her, each note a challenge she was determined to master. 3 weeks had passed since her strange encounter with Alexander Wells, and she hadn't seen him since. Probably for the best, she thought. What would a famous symphony director want with a night cleaner who could barely read sheet music? Still, his words had sparked something in her. Every night, after making sure the building was empty, She would return to the grand piano and practice until her fingers ached and her eyes grew heavy. The morning sunlight streamed through the small window of Elena's apartment as she fumbled with her keys, exhaustion making her clumsy. Inside, the familiar smell of her mother's coffee welcomed her home. "Mija, you look dead on your feet," Rosa Vasquez said from her wheelchair by the kitchen table. At 72, Rosa's body was failing her, but her mind remained sharp as ever. "Another late night?" Elena kissed her mother's cheek. The concert hall was extra messy. Some school group came through yesterday. The lie came easily after weeks of practice. Elena couldn't tell her mother about her late-night piano sessions. Rosa would worry about her losing her job if caught. And they couldn't afford that risk. "I made breakfast," Rosa said, gesturing to the covered plate on the counter. "Eat, then sleep. You have Mrs. Chen's house to clean at 3. Elena nodded gratefully. Between her night job at the concert hall and daytime housekeeping for wealthy families, she barely had time to sleep. But the extra money meant better medication for her mother and a small savings account that might someday pay for proper piano lessons. "How are your hands today, Mama?" Elena asked, noticing how her mother winced when reaching for her coffee cup. "Same as yesterday. The arthritis doesn't get better, only less bad on some days." Elena gently took her mother's twisted hands in her own. Once, these hands had created beautiful embroidery that people would commission from all over the city. Now, they could barely hold a needle. "I'll massage them after breakfast," Elena promised. As she ate, Elena's thoughts drifted back to the piano, to Mozart's composition that was slowly becoming part of her muscle memory. Sometimes, when half asleep, her fingers would twitch against her blanket, playing invisible keys. Later, after helping her mother with her morning routine and crawling into bed herself, Elena dreamed of playing on a stage, the hall filled with people. In her dream, Alexander Wells watched from the front row, that same surprised expression on his face from when he'd first heard her humming. The next evening, Elena arrived at the concert hall earlier than usual. The orchestra had a performance, which meant more cleaning afterward, but also the chance to hear live music before starting her shift. She slipped into the back of the upper balcony, where the ushers didn't bother checking tickets once the performance had started. From this hidden corner, Elena had watched dozens of concerts over the years, absorbing every note, every technique. Tonight's program featured Beethoven and, to her delight, Mozart. She closed her eyes during the Mozart piece, her fingers silently playing along in her lap, matching the pianist on stage note for note in the section she'd mastered. When she opened her eyes, she caught a glimpse of Alexander on the conductor's podium, his movements precise yet passionate as he guided the orchestra. She wondered if he remembered their conversation or if it had been just another forgettable moment in his busy life. After the performance, Elena changed into her uniform in the small staff bathroom and began her usual routine. The audience mess was substantial tonight. Programs scattered everywhere, forgotten scarves, even a child's stuffed rabbit left under a seat. She worked efficiently, her mind still replaying the music she'd heard. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she finished cleaning the main hall. The building was silent, the orchestra members and staff long gone. Everyone except the night guard, who was predictably dozing in his chair by the main entrance. Elena wheeled her cleaning cart into the storage closet and then made her way back to the stage. The grand piano waited, its polished surface gleaming under the single light she'd left on. She sat on the bench, stretched her fingers, and began her nightly practice. The Mozart sonata was coming along better than she'd expected. The simple opening melody flowed easily now, though the more complex middle section still gave her trouble. So absorbed was she in her playing that Elena didn't notice the figure standing in the shadows of the wings until he spoke. "You've been practicing, Elena's." Hands crashed down on the keys in shock, producing a jarring discord that echoed through the empty hall. Alexander Wells stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wells, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be—" He held up a hand. "Please don't apologize. And call me Alexander." Elena stood awkwardly, smoothing her cleaning uniform. "I should go. I know I'm not supposed to touch the instruments." "Actually," he said, walking toward the piano, "I was hoping I'd find you here." "You were?" Alexander nodded. "I've been staying late after performances, coming in early before rehearsals. The night guard mentioned the cleaning lady sometimes stays after hours." Elena felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "Are you going to report me?" To her surprise, Alexander laughed. Report you for practicing Mozart? That would make me the villain in this story, wouldn't it? He gestured to the piano bench. Please continue. I'd like to hear how far you've come. Elena hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Under his watchful gaze, she began to play, her nervousness making her fingers stumble over notes she'd perfected days ago. Relax, Alexander said gently. Pretend I'm not here. She took a deep breath and started again. This time the music flowed more naturally, though still imperfect. When she finished the section she knew best, she stopped and looked up at him uncertainly. That's impressive progress for someone without formal training, he said, his tone sincere. How long have you been practicing? This piece? About 3 weeks. But I've been borrowing the piano for about 6 months. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Borrowing? Elena looked down at her hands. I always make sure no one's around, and I'm very careful with it. I believe you. He sat beside her on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. Show me how you're approaching this middle section. For the next hour, Alexander guided her through the troublesome passages, explaining techniques she'd never heard of, demonstrating proper finger positioning. He was patient but demanding, pushing her to try again when she made mistakes rather than letting them slide. Why are you helping me? Elena finally asked during a break. Alexander considered the question. Because talent shouldn't be wasted, regardless of where it's found. He paused, then added more quietly, and because I haven't been this interested in teaching in a very long time. I can't pay for lessons, Elena said bluntly. I'm not offering lessons for payment. Alexander stood and walked a few steps away as if gathering his thoughts. The symphony has an outreach program for underprivileged communities. We provide free music education, instruments, performance opportunities. I'm hardly a child, Elena pointed out. The program isn't just for children. There's a new adult division starting next month. He turned back to face her. You would be perfect for it. Elena shook her head. I work 2 jobs, Mr. Wells. I take care of my mother. I don't have time for programs. Alexander, he corrected gently, and perhaps we could arrange something more flexible. Private instruction once a week. Here after your shift. The offer was too good to be true. Elena searched his face for signs of an ulterior motive but found only genuine interest. Why would you do that for me? Alexander sat back down, this time at the far end of the bench. When I was younger, someone took a chance on me. I wasn't from a musical family. My father was a factory worker who thought music was a waste of time. But my elementary school teacher heard me singing and arranged for me to audition for a boys' choir. That changed the entire course of my life. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys. Sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in your potential. Elena was silent for a long moment. I would be grateful, she finally said, for any help you can give me. Good. Alexander smiled, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. Same time next Tuesday? Elena nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. As Alexander gathered his belongings to leave, he glanced back at her. Keep working on that, Mozart. I'm looking forward to hearing the full piece someday. The reference to his joking proposal hung unspoken between them. Elena felt her cheeks warm again, but Alexander merely nodded politely and left. Alone once more, Elena turned back to the piano. Her tired body suddenly felt energized, her mind racing with everything she'd learned. For the first time, her dream of becoming a real musician seemed like a possibility, not just a fantasy. She played until dawn broke through the high windows of the concert hall, each note carrying her further from the life she'd always known and closer to the one she'd always wanted. The weeks blended into months as Elena's late-night piano lessons with Alexander became the highlight of her exhausting routine. Every Tuesday after her cleaning shift, he would appear in the concert hall, sometimes tired from a long day of rehearsals but always patient with her progress. Tonight, Elena waited at the piano, her fingers running through warm-up exercises he'd taught her. The Mozart sonata was coming along beautifully now. She could play the entire piece, though certain passages still needed work. Sorry I'm late, Alexander said, hurrying onto the stage. He looked more disheveled than usual. His tie loosened and hair slightly mussed. Budget meeting ran long. Elena nodded sympathetically. Everything okay? He sighed, setting his briefcase down harder than necessary. The board wants cuts again. They always look at maintenance and support staff first. A cold feeling spread through Elena's chest. The cleaning crew? Among others, Alexander confirmed, loosening his tie further. I fought against it, but I'm just one voice. When will we know? They're announcing decisions next week. He rubbed his temples. Let's not talk about it tonight. Show me what you've been working on. Elena began to play, but her mind kept drifting to the possibility of losing her job. Without the night position at the concert hall, she wouldn't be able to practice, wouldn't have these lessons, would have to find other work to support her mother. Stop, Alexander said gently. Your technique is perfect, but there's no feeling. What's going on in that head of yours? Elena's hands fell into her lap. If I lose this job, you won't lose access to the piano, he assured her quickly. We'll figure something out. She looked up at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. Over these months of lessons, something had shifted between them. The initial awkwardness of their different stations had faded, replaced by genuine friendship and mutual respect. Thank you, she said simply. Alexander nodded, then gestured to the piano, from the beginning. And this time lose yourself in the music. That's where Mozart lives. By the end of the lesson, Elena had recaptured the joy of playing, pushing her worries aside for the pure pleasure of creating something beautiful. As Alexander packed up to leave, he paused. There's a meeting tomorrow about the cuts. All department heads and affected staff. 10 in the morning in the boardroom. I clean at night, Elena reminded him. I've never even seen the boardroom. 3rd floor, end of the hall. You can't miss it. He gave her a meaningful look. I think it would be good if all potentially affected staff were present. After he left, Elena considered his words. The meeting would mean missing sleep between her night shift and her afternoon housekeeping job. But if her position was at stake, she needed to be there. The next morning, Elena stood nervously outside the boardroom, feeling out of place in her best clothes. A simple blouse and skirt that seemed shabby compared to the business attire of others filing into the meeting. She recognized a few maintenance workers and security staff, but most were strangers who looked at her with curiosity. Can I help you? Asked a polished woman with a clipboard. I'm Elena Vasquez, night cleaning staff. I heard about the meeting. The woman checked her list and frowned. Night staff weren't specifically invited, but she sighed. Go ahead in. Standing room only at this point. The boardroom was crowded with anxious employees. Elena squeezed into a spot along the back wall, trying to make herself invisible. At the front of the room, board members sat around a large table, with Alexander at one end, his expression carefully neutral. The meeting began with dry budget discussions that made Elena's eyes grow heavy after her sleepless night. She struggled to follow the financial terms being thrown around until the conversation shifted to specific cuts. Maintenance and cleaning services are obvious targets, said an older man with thick glasses. We're paying premium rates for services that could be outsourced at half the cost. Murmurs of concern spread through the room. Outsourced. Cleaning crews won't have the same care for our instruments and specialized equipment, Alexander countered. Our current staff understands the value of what they're handling. It's dusting and vacuuming, Wells, not brain surgery, another board member said dismissively. Elena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Is that all they thought she did? Just mindlessly push a mop around? Perhaps, a woman in an expensive suit interjected. We should hear from some of the staff before making decisions. After all, they might have insights we're missing. Several maintenance workers spoke about their specialized knowledge of the building's aging systems. The head of security emphasized their training in handling intoxicated patrons without disrupting performances. When no one else volunteered, Elena found herself raising her hand, heart pounding. Yes? The board chairman looked surprised. And you are? Elena Vasquez, night cleaning staff. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I just wanted to say that we do more than dust and vacuum. We're the last line of defense for your instruments. Last month I noticed condensation forming on the inside of the grand piano lid. Turns out the humidity control system had failed. I reported it immediately and moved dehumidifiers near all the wooden instruments until it was fixed. Alexander was staring at her with an unreadable expression. And, she continued, finding courage, we know every inch of this building. We can tell when something's not right. Loose wiring, water damage, security concerns. We care about this place because for many of us, it's the closest we'll ever get to being part of the music world we love. The room had fallen silent. Elena suddenly realized everyone was looking at her and felt her confidence waver. That's all. Thank you. The meeting continued, but Elena barely heard the rest. As soon as it ended, she slipped out, embarrassed by her outburst and desperate for sleep before her next job. She was waiting for the elevator when Alexander caught up to her. That was unexpected, he said. Elena looked down. I shouldn't have spoken up. No, you absolutely should have. You reminded everyone in that room that this hall isn't just a building or a business, it's a community. He hesitated, then added, I didn't know about the humidity issue with the piano. It was on my incident report. I guess those don't make it to the director's desk. They will from now on, Alexander promised. The elevator arrived and he held the door for her. By the way, there's something else I've been meaning to ask you. Elena stepped into the elevator, raising an eyebrow at his suddenly nervous demeanor. The symphony is hosting a community talent showcase next month. Local musicians, students from our outreach programs, that sort of thing. He followed her into the elevator. I'd like you to perform. The doors closed, leaving them alone in the small space. Perform? In public? Elena's voice rose with panic. I'm not ready for that. You are, Alexander insisted. Your Mozart is nearly performance ready. Nearly isn't good enough for a real audience. Then we'll work harder these next few weeks. The elevator reached the ground floor, but Alexander pressed the button to keep the doors closed. Elena, you have a gift. Hiding it in empty halls after midnight isn't fair, to you or to everyone who deserves to hear you play. She shook her head. People like me don't belong on that stage. People like you? Alexander's voice hardened. You mean talented, dedicated musicians who work harder than anyone I know? You know what I mean, Elena said quietly. I clean the floors that real musicians walk on. I'll be a joke. Alexander's expression softened. The only joke would be letting fear stop you from showing the world who you really are. He released the button, and the doors slid open. Think about it. That's all I ask. That night, Elena couldn't focus on her cleaning. Alexander's invitation kept replaying in her mind. The thought of performing on the same stage as trained musicians terrified her. But beneath the fear lay a tiny spark of longing. What would it feel like to play for a real audience? To be seen as a musician, not just the woman who emptied their trash. After finishing her shift, she sat at the piano in the darkened concert hall, staring at the empty seats. She imagined them filled with people, judging her, pitying her, or maybe, just maybe, appreciating her music. Cleaning lady plays Mozart, she murmured. What a headline. She began to play, not the carefully practiced sonata, but an improvisation, something that came from her own heart rather than sheet music. The melody expressed her frustration, her dreams, her fear of reaching for something beyond her grasp. As the music flowed from her fingers, a decision formed in her mind. When Alexander arrived for their next lesson, Elena was waiting with determined eyes. I'll do it, she said before he could even set down his briefcase. I'll play in the showcase. Alexander's face lit up with genuine pleasure. You won't regret it. I already do, Elena admitted with a nervous laugh. But I'll do it anyway. That night they worked harder than ever before, refining every note of her Mozart piece. When Elena finally left the concert hall, dawn was breaking over the city. Instead of exhaustion, she felt a strange lightness in her step. For the first time in her life, she was walking toward something, not just surviving another day. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of practice, work, and too little sleep. Elena's fingers developed calluses in new places, and she caught herself playing Mozart in the air while riding the bus between jobs. The community showcase was only 2 days away, and despite Alexander's encouragement, panic was setting in. I can't do this, Elena said during their final rehearsal. She'd just stumbled through a passage she'd played perfectly the night before. I should cancel. Alexander leaned against the piano, studying her with a mixture of concern and determination. You're just nervous. It's normal. Normal for real musicians, maybe. Not for cleaning ladies playing pretend. He frowned. Is that how you still see yourself? After all these months? Elena rubbed her tired eyes. It's how everyone will see me. Not everyone. Alexander sat beside her on the bench. Not me. There was something in his voice that made Elena look up. Over these months of lessons, they'd developed a friendship that transcended their different backgrounds, but they'd both been careful to maintain professional boundaries. Tonight, something felt different. The board made their decision about the budget cuts, Alexander said, changing the subject. They're keeping the current cleaning staff. Your speech made an impression. Relief washed over Elena. That's wonderful news. There's more. He seemed suddenly nervous, his usual confidence wavering. They're creating a new position, part-time community liaison for the outreach program, someone who understands both the symphony world and the people we're trying to reach. He paused. I recommended you for the job. Elena stared at him. Me? But I don't have any qualifications. You have exactly the qualifications we need. You understand music, you connect with people, and you see possibilities where others see limitations. Alexander's eyes held hers. It would mean fewer night cleaning hours, more regular schedule, better pay, and, he smiled slightly, staff discount on concert tickets for your mother. How did you know I wanted to bring my mother to concerts? You mentioned it once. Said she used to sing to you when you were little. The fact that he remembered such a small detail from their conversations touched Elena deeply. Thank you, she whispered. But I can't accept a job out of charity. It's not charity. It's recognition of your value. Alexander stood up and paced across the stage. The board needs to see that value too. Your performance at the showcase will prove to them that I made the right recommendation. So no pressure, Elena said with a nervous laugh. None at all, he agreed, his smile returning. Just play like you do when it's just us here at night and you'll amaze them. The day of the showcase arrived with perfect early summer weather. Elena had arranged for her neighbor to stay with her mother so she could arrive at the concert hall early. Her simple black dress, bought secondhand but elegant enough for the occasion, felt strange after months of wearing only her cleaning uniform or casual clothes in this building. Backstage was chaos. Students from the youth program ran around excitedly while their teachers tried to corral them. Adult performers from community music groups tuned instruments and practiced difficult passages. Elena stood to the side, feeling like an imposter among these people who identified as musicians. Elena, you came. Alexander appeared beside her, looking different in his formal concert attire. I was half afraid you'd change your mind. I still might, she admitted, her hands trembling slightly. I'm performing alongside real musicians, Alexander. People who've had years of training. And you'll hold your own among them, he said with such conviction that she almost believed him. He checked his watch. I need to greet the board members. You're on in 30 minutes. Fourth performer. As he turned to go, Elena caught his arm. Alexander, wait. No matter how this goes, thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. He opened his mouth as if to say something important, then closed it again. Just play from your heart, he said finally, giving her hand a quick squeeze before hurrying away. Elena found a quiet corner to run through her piece one last time in her head. Nearby, she overheard two board members talking as they toured the backstage area. Wells certainly put together an interesting program, said a woman's voice Elena recognized from the budget meeting. I hear he's even got one of the cleaning staff performing. Really? A man responded. That's unusual. He's quite invested in this outreach business. Wants to create some new position for community work. Ah, now it makes sense. Office romance? The woman laughed. With a cleaning lady? Hardly Patrick's type. He probably just feels sorry for her. Elena's stomach clenched. Patrick? Who is Patrick? Then she remembered seeing Alexander's full name on a plaque once. Patrick Alexander Wells. He went by his middle name. But of course board members would use his first name. The conversation had moved on, but the damage was done. Alexander felt sorry for her. That explained everything. The special attention, the job recommendation, this performance opportunity. He wasn't championing her talent. He was salving his conscience with charity for the poor cleaning woman who loved music. When a stagehand came to tell her she was up next, Elena nearly ran for the exit. Only the thought of her mother, who had taught her to never quit what she started, kept her feet moving toward the stage. The lights were blinding as she walked to the piano. She couldn't see the audience, just felt their presence. Hundreds of people waiting to judge her. As she sat at the bench, she caught sight of Alexander in the front row, giving her an encouraging nod. Pity. It was all just pity. The thought should have crushed her, but instead a strange calm settled over Elena. If he pitied her, she would show him, show all of them, that she needed no one's pity. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much sleep and comfort, to be anyone's charity case. Elena's fingers touched the keys, and Mozart's Sonata No. 16 in C major began to flow through the concert hall. The opening melody was simple, delicate, just as she'd first heard Alexander play it months ago. But as she moved into the piece, something shifted. She was no longer playing just the notes on the page. She was playing her journey, the late nights, the frustrations, the moments of breakthrough. Her fingers found emotions in the music she hadn't known were there, grief and joy intertwining in Mozart's centuries-old composition. Elena forgot the audience, forgot the board members and their judgments, forgot even Alexander and his pity. There was only the music speaking through her hands in a language more honest than words. When the final notes faded, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the hall erupted in applause. Elena blinked against the stage lights, slowly returning to reality. She stood and bowed as Alexander had taught her, then walked off stage on shaky legs. Alexander was waiting in the wings, his face alight with something that couldn't possibly be pity. "Elena, you transformed that piece. Made it your own." "Thank you," she said stiffly, the overheard conversation still stinging. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." She pushed past him and headed for the stage door that led to the alley behind the concert hall. Outside, the evening air cooled her flushed face as she leaned against the brick wall, processing what had just happened. She had performed on the symphony stage. People had applauded, not out of politeness, but genuine appreciation. Whatever Alexander's motives, this moment belonged to her alone. The door opened, and Alexander stepped out, concern written across his features. "Did I say something wrong?" Elena shook her head. "It's nothing. Just needed to breathe. It wasn't nothing. You've barely looked at me since you came off stage." He moved closer. "Talk to me, Elena." "I heard some board members talking," she said finally, "about how you feel sorry for me, how I'm your charity project." Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to anger. "Who said that?" "It doesn't matter." "Is it true?" "Of course not." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Elena, do you think I'd spend hours every week teaching someone I didn't believe had extraordinary talent? Do you think I'd recommend someone for a staff position if I didn't truly believe they were the best person for the job?" "You've been kind to me," Elena acknowledged. "More than kind." "Not kind," Alexander corrected. "Honest. Maybe for the first time in years." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, these months of teaching you have reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Before the politics and the fundraising and the endless board meetings, you play with your whole heart without pretense. That's rare, Elena. Rarer than you know." The sincerity in his voice was impossible to doubt. Elena felt the hurt begin to dissolve, replaced by a cautious warmth. "The board members are waiting to meet you," Alexander said, offering his hand. "Ready to go back in and accept your applause?" Elena looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. For the first time, she allowed herself to see him not as the untouchable director or her teacher, but simply as a man who believed in her music and her potential. She took his hand. "Ready." As they walked back inside together, Elena realized something had fundamentally changed. She had walked onto that stage as the cleaning lady trying to play piano. She was walking off it as a musician who happened to clean. Life changed quickly after the showcase. Elena accepted the community liaison position, working afternoons at the concert hall coordinating outreach programs while continuing her night cleaning duties on a reduced schedule. The extra income meant she could finally hire proper help for her mother during the day, easing the constant worry that had shadowed her for years. But the biggest change was how people treated her. The same staff who had barely noticed her existence now greeted her by name. Musicians asked her opinion on community events. Even board members nodded respectfully when passing her in hallways. Only one relationship remained complicated: her connection with Alexander. Since the night of her performance, a new tension had developed between them. Their weekly piano lessons continued, but something unspoken hung in the air, an awareness that boundaries were blurring. 3 months after the showcase, Elena was organizing sheet music in the library when Alexander found her. "There you are," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've been looking everywhere." Elena glanced up from her work. "Something wrong with the youth program schedule?" "No, nothing like that." He seemed unusually hesitant. "I have news. The video of your performance has gone viral. She frowned. What does that mean? Someone uploaded it to the internet. It's been viewed over 100,000 times. Alexander pulled out his phone and showed her a video titled, Cleaning Lady Plays Mozart. Amazing Hidden Talent. Elena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Who would post that? One of the board members' children, apparently. But Elena, people love it. Read the comments. She scanned through dozens of messages praising her playing, her emotion, her obvious connection to the music. Some even asked if she had an album or where they could hear more of her performances. This is crazy, she murmured. It gets better, Alexander continued. The dean of the City Music Academy called this morning. They want to offer you a scholarship for their adult education program. Elena's hands froze on the sheet music. A scholarship? To music school? Full tuition. Evening classes to accommodate your work schedule. His eyes shone with excitement. This is your chance, Elena. Formal training with some of the best teachers in the country. She sat down slowly, the magnitude of the opportunity washing over her. I never thought something like this was possible. You earned it, Alexander said simply. Your talent did this, not luck or charity or anything else. Elena looked up at him, suddenly realizing how much his belief in her had changed her life. None of this would have happened without you. I just opened a door. You walked through it on your own. The moment stretched between them, waited with things unsaid. Alexander finally broke the silence. There's a reception tomorrow night for scholarship recipients. The dean would like to meet you. I'll be there, Elena promised, after I finish my cleaning shift. Alexander's smile faltered slightly. Actually, that's something else we need to discuss. The board feels that your new position and scholarship opportunity make the night cleaning role unnecessary. They're firing me. Not firing, he corrected quickly. Transitioning. Your community liaison hours would increase to full-time with better pay and benefits. Elena considered this. The cleaning job had been her lifeline for years, but it had also defined her in ways that now felt limiting. So I wouldn't be the cleaning lady anymore. You haven't been just the cleaning lady for a long time, Alexander said gently. The reception at the Music Academy was grander than any event Elena had ever attended. Dressed in a new outfit she'd splurged on for the occasion, she moved nervously through crowds of accomplished musicians and wealthy donors. Alexander had promised to meet her there, but she'd been waiting alone for nearly 30 minutes. Ms. Vasquez? An older woman in an elegant pantsuit approached. I'm Dr. Chen, Dean of the Academy. We're delighted you could join us tonight. Elena shook her hand, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Thank you for the scholarship opportunity. It's an honor I never expected. Talent deserves nurturing, regardless of background. Dr. Chen gestured around the ornate reception hall. Many of our most accomplished alumni came to us from unlikely circumstances. As they discussed the evening program schedule, Elena spotted Alexander entering the hall. He scanned the crowd until his eyes found hers, a smile spreading across his face. But before he could join them, he was intercepted by a stunning woman in a designer dress who placed a familiar hand on his arm. That's Victoria Harding, Dr. Chen remarked, following Elena's gaze, one of our major donors. Her family foundation funds several of our scholarships. Elena watched as Victoria laughed at something Alexander said, her hand still resting on his arm. They looked right together, both elegant, educated, part of the same world. Excuse me, Elena murmured to Dr. Chen. I need some fresh air. She slipped away through the crowd and found a small balcony overlooking the academy gardens. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as she tried to make sense of the jealousy coursing through her. Alexander had never suggested they were anything more than teacher and student, friend and colleague. His personal life was none of her business, yet the sight of him with Victoria had shaken something, loose inside her. A recognition of feelings she'd been denying for months. There you are. Elena turned to find Alexander. Standing in the balcony doorway, Dr. Chen said you needed air. He joined her at the railing. Overwhelming, isn't it? All these people, this place. A bit, she admitted. I was just thinking that a year ago I would have been cleaning a place like this, not attending a reception as a guest. Alexander studied her profile in the dim light. Do you miss it? Cleaning? Parts of it, Elena said honestly. The quiet, the solitude, being invisible had its advantages. You were never invisible to me, he said softly. The simple statement hung between them. Elena finally asked the question that had been bothering her all evening. "Your friend seems nice." "Victoria?" "Victoria?" Alexander looked puzzled, then understanding dawned. "She's a board member's daughter. Very determined to increase arts funding in underprivileged schools. We serve on a committee together." "Oh." Elena felt foolish for her assumption. "You thought—" Alexander didn't finish the sentence, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Elena, there hasn't been anyone in my life for a long time. Not since my divorce 3 years ago." This was news to Elena. "I didn't know you were married." Briefly. To a concert pianist who found symphony life in this city too provincial for her ambitions. His tone was matter-of-fact, without bitterness. "She's in Vienna now. Happier there, I think." They stood in companionable silence, watching the garden below where other guests strolled among carefully tended paths. "I have something for you," Alexander said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box. "A congratulations gift for your scholarship." Elena opened it to find a delicate silver pin shaped like a piano key. "It's beautiful." "Turn it over." Engraved on the back were the opening notes of Mozart's Sonata No. 16, the piece that had brought them together. "I'll never forget that night," Alexander said quietly. "When I heard you humming in the empty concert hall, it changed everything." "For me too," Elena whispered. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Then Alexander cleared his throat. "We should go back inside. They'll be announcing the scholarship recipients soon." But neither of them moved. "Alexander," Elena began hesitantly, "that joke you made the first night we met." He looked confused, then his expression cleared. "About marrying you if you played Mozart?" Elena nodded, embarrassed but determined. Was it really just a joke? Alexander's eyes widened slightly. For once, the composed director seemed at a loss for words. At the time, yes. I hardly knew you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. But now, after all these months, he took a step closer. "I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about it." The confession hung in the air between them. "What about the board?" "The other musicians?" Elena asked. "I'm still just the cleaning lady to them." "You've never been just anything," Alexander said firmly. "And anyone who can't see your worth doesn't matter to me." Somewhere inside, an announcement was being made. Applause filtered through the open balcony doors, but neither Elena nor Alexander moved to go back in. "I don't know what happens next," Elena admitted. "This is all so new. The scholarship, the job, whatever this is between us." Alexander took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "We don't have to know everything now. We can figure it out together, one step at a time." He smiled, like learning a difficult piece of music. Elena looked down at their joined hands, his with the faint calluses of a lifetime of music, hers still bearing the marks of years of hard work. Different paths that had somehow led to this shared moment. "I'd like that," she said softly. 1 year later, Elena stood in the wings of the concert hall, watching as Alexander conducted the youth symphony. Children from neighborhoods like hers playing instruments many of their parents could never have afforded. As the community program director now, she had helped build this moment, recruiting students from overlooked schools and communities. Her own studies at the academy were challenging but rewarding. Some nights she still couldn't believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. After the performance, Alexander found her backstage, his face alight with the joy music always brought him. "They sounded wonderful," Elena told him, straightening his slightly crooked bow tie. The gesture was comfortable, intimate, the familiarity of two people who had built a life together. "Thanks to your program," he said, catching her hand and kissing it. The simple silver band on her finger caught the light. "Ready to go home?" Elena nodded. As they walked through the concert hall toward the exit, they passed the grand piano on the stage. Elena paused, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "Still think about that first night?" Alexander asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Every day," she answered honestly. "How one moment can change everything." "The moment you played Mozart," he teased. Elena laughed and leaned into his embrace. "The moment someone finally saw me." Together they walked out into the night, leaving behind the empty hall where their story had begun, a cleaner, a director, and Mozart's gentle notes bridging worlds that had only seemed far apart.